Um, it is a huge pleasure for me definitely to have been the chair for the jury in selecting the paper along with my wonderful colleagues Marie-Andrée Jacob and Eva Sointu, who was part of the long listing process, and our colleagues Rosie Reed and Soren Carlson, who were part of the shortlisting process. This year has been quite unusual in that while we would have very much liked to have this event in person, for various reasons, this was the next best thing. But what was astounding about this particular process for me was the breadth and depth and diversity and just genius of the papers that we get to witness every day within the pages of the journal. And it was a real pleasure to read through them. Um, we came up with a unanimous decision to appoint not one but two winners and two winning papers with differently, I suppose, highlight and showcase the very unique nature of this journal, which is both generalist but also has is completely steeped in the values of the Sociological Review Manifesto. One of the things that was really important in the selection process was that we were not guided by strict and objective so-called selection criteria, but were guided by the core principles of the manifesto. Does it open up discussion and not close it down? Is it able to kind of tread that part between in the gaps between disciplines? And really, most importantly, does it move you? Do you want to read and reread it again? And does it actually have an impact in the real world? And I'm absolutely thrilled to say both papers do this work in a brilliant way. So it has been a real pleasure to have chaired the selection process. I would right now want to kind of congratulate our fantastic winners. This is an amazing achievement, and you've written two beautiful papers that I hope many of us will continue to want to read again. Our first winner of the Sociological Review Journal Article of the year 2023 is the paper titled Power Relations and Persistent Low Fertility Among Domestic Workers in Latin America. And it has been, authored by Andre, who is here, and also Andrés Felipe Castro Torres, and Edith Yolanda Gutierrez-Vazquez. I hope I have not butchered your name too badly. A phenomenal piece of work that shows us just how strong and how much potential there is in theoretically driven quantitative sociology. Really fascinating and excellent. Our next winner, and we are very thrilled to have the author here, is a different type of paper called Cards Against Gamification. And Cosmin Popan is our presenting author. Many congratulations also to David and Jamie, the co-authors. I will be chairing this session today, but mainly the focus is for us to hear from the authors and for you to ask questions if you have any. The meeting is being recorded at present, but enough from me. I'd like to now move on to, or rather, sorry, I'm a bit nervous for some weird reason. I'd like to hand over to Mikla Benson, who will now talk about the Sociological Review Foundation. Thanks, Mikla.
Thank you very much, Sweta. So I'm Mikla. I am the Chief Executive of the Sociological Review Foundation and former editor of the journal. And you're probably here because of your familiarity with the journal, which is a very long-standing peer-reviewed sociology journal in the UK. But I wanted to take the opportunity to share with you a few words about the foundation, the charity that's behind the journal. Our purpose is to advance the public understanding of sociology. And in various ways, we offer a space to question taken for granted understandings of the social world and to provide a platform for thinking about alternative possibilities. So in addition to the journal and of course the excellent monograph series that the journal editors produce, we also do a range of activities which include supporting early career researchers through training and bursaries, providing funding for seminar series, an annual fellowship, and I can see our current fellow Brenda is here with us today, We also host in-person and online events such as this one and present sociological insights to global audiences via our podcast and our open access digital magazine. And just in case anyone has a little bit of a taste for getting involved with us a little bit more, we currently have an opportunity for people to join us as editors of the magazine. So that's an open call at the moment. Really, the ethos behind this is that we think that in our deeply unequal world, critical and engaged sociology is actually more important than ever. And we recently launched a campaign for donations. So if anybody feels that they can support us even a little bit, every penny counts towards this project, it is possible to do that. And I know that Danielle's now put a link to that donor box into the chat there. But of course, I realise that is not for everyone. So obviously, please do not feel obliged to do that. But also, in addition to all of these things, if you don't already follow us on social media or subscribe to our monthly email newsletter, please do. And again, Danielle's going to put information about that down there. And we are now, importantly, also on Blue Sky. So all being well, the video that is being recorded of this event will be shared later via our YouTube channel. And I just have one final request of you, which is at the end of this session, you will be sent a feedback form, a quick online form about the event. Please, please, please fill it in, because what it does is it contributes towards both our understandings of what we might do differently, better, what's working for you in terms of events. But we also include information about how our events have been attended and what value people have got out of it in our annual report that we prepare about the charity, which is quite important for our future fundraising activities. So we'd be really grateful if you could do that. But without further ado, I'll hand back to you, Sweta, I think.
Yes, that's right. Many, many thanks. Again, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite our first winning author, and it is a collaborative team effort between André and Edith, but André will be presenting on behalf of both of them to share with us this brilliant paper. But before we do that, I'd like to now introduce Marie-Andrée Jacob, who is the selection panelist who will introduce the paper briefly before the author then presents their work. Over to you, Marie.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and especially hello to Andrés and Edith. So your paper, I thought just in 3 words, was meaningful, nourishing, and devastating. All of us on the panel, we really enjoyed it, and I want to spend a few minutes to just tell you why, what was most remarkable about it. First, so really the paper, and for all of you online, you should go and read it. It's a paper that examines the large and also intimate workings of chains of care. So in 3 Latin American national contexts. So it asks the how question of chains of care. And it combines population studies and quantitative demographic data with also qualitative analysis. And it's all supported by a very sensitive and critical standpoint and a very sophisticated understanding of distributive justice of reproduction. It's rare to see a quantitative paper, including graphs and tables, that has an opening reference to a film. It's rare, and here there's right from the start an opening reference to a beautiful film of 2018, Roma. So that brings the readers in, including especially readers like me, who perhaps are less appealed at the outset but to the richness of what quantitative sociology can offer to sociology and to broader audiences. So the paper connects really biological reproduction with social reproduction, but it's aware of the challenges in doing so. So it's very aware of its methodological standpoint. It even pushes back on some of hegemonic theories in quantitative data analysis. And it really shows how methods complement each other. And in this case, the paper really shows how there's coherence and consistencies between large-scale quantitative assessment in 3 locations, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, and there's consistent with qualitative findings on physical proximity, surveillance, and control of lives of domestic workers. So which means that the paper, what tells us is that those large structures of inequalities that we are familiar with, of economic status, class, gender, race, ethnicity, level of schoolings, get exacerbated by historical processes and changes in labor market, migration status, and this has an impact on domestic workers' reproductive lives. So Andrés will talk more about the paper and its workings, but I just want to share a key insight, something that really stayed with me from the paper. It's something very material and intimate about the women who cohabit, how their physical proximity is also happens at the same time as socioeconomic distance. So how proximity and distance is together. Is that higher fertility among employers and lower mortality of their children is often at the expense of the reproduction of other women. So, and this, I think it's really a straightforward claim that the authors came and they say that they're not interested in unidirectional causality. They just say we are interested in the effects of the coexistence of those 2 mechanisms. We're not concerned about causal direction, but we say the existence of differential outcomes, and all in the background of asymmetric power relationships. So these 2 outcomes are there, they're shown to be locked together, and it's hard to read, and then it's hard to look away. And I really like that pushback on just causality, but it's there. And just the second question, briefly, in 1 minute, how does it enhance our understanding of the sociological, your paper, Andrés and Edith? I think you just show how low fertility amongst domestic workers in Latin America is a kind of warning. It's like a canary in the coal mine. So in addition to being deeply troubling in itself, it's also an indicator of failure. So that's in the sense that it's the canary in the coal mine. And sociological work that tells you something specific, rich, nourishing about a particular setting and set of people, but that also evokes a larger context and asks what, why, and how question. And here, those question is primordial question of reproduction. And it's the data point that tells us something really important about inequality. And your diagnosis is hard. At the same time, it's very compelling. And as I said, you can't turn away and you can't forget the paper. It's a salutary shock, and congratulations. And I'm really curious to hear Andrés presenting the paper.
Thanks so much, Marie. I couldn't have put it in these kind of words myself. The power of diverse methods in addressing social inequalities has just been astounding. I do invite everyone to read the paper. But over now to our presenting author, André. We'd love to hear from you. We have about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then we'll go over to questions for this paper before we move on. Thanks so much, André.
Okay, hello everyone. I really feel honored with this recognition to our work. And thank you very much, Marie-Andrée. I think your words mean a lot for me. It really tells me that we were able to transmit the message that we wanted to do. And I'm really happy with your interpretation. And I really feel something like this has never happened with any other paper I have. And it feels great. So I am happy that you enjoy the paper, and I hope everyone else can also enjoy. I am particularly happy with our pushback on causality, because this is something that appears every now and then in quantitative research. And with Edith, not only in this paper, but in other work we have together, we have tried hard to push on that. And perhaps what I present, I will show some of the things that are related to this. Also, I'm really happy that you notice how we try to counter some broader and mainstream narratives regarding demographic change. And thank you very much then for this careful reading and this careful consideration of our work, and for this immense recognition. It means a lot for us. So for this 20 minutes presentation, I have prepared some slides with a selection of the results that we show in the paper. And I also wanted to show some of the tensions that we experienced while we were doing this, some of the challenges that we face, and a few like results that pertain to this paper in particular, but also what I think are our broader contributions to sociology. I will avoid most of the technical parts of it so that we can focus on what I think is substantial on this work. Okay, so let me start by saying a little bit about the context. So what you see here is a figure that shows the average number of children per woman from 1950 to 2015. And the lines represent the trajectories of this indicator for our 3 countries of the study. And this is more or less what you will see. The trend is very similar across all Latin American countries. So in 1950, on average, women in these countries will have more than 6 children, right? And what happened over time, over these 50 years, is that the number of children per woman decreased very, very rapidly. And by 2015, the average number of children was about 2, right? And if we look at these numbers now, in 2020 and onwards, this average is going below 2 or very close to 2. And this is what is called in demography, or this is known as the fertility transition. So societies move from a context where women have more than 5 or 6 children to context where the average number of children per woman is around 2, right? And so basically what this demographic aggregated analysis has done is to link these processes with the process of development, right? And to represent the development, I have put here a figure with the same time period, 1950 to 2015, but in this case, the indicator is the mean years of schooling. So again, back to 1950, on average, people in these 3 Latin American countries had 2 years of schooling. So if we consider today's standard, this is a relative very low schooling level. And by 2015, the average number of schooling years was about 8 years. And if we look at this now, it's even higher. So demographic research has linked these 2 processes, has used this temporal correspondence to argue that demographic change, in this particular case, fertility decline or the fertility transition, is very linked to development, right? So basically, as societies develop, their demographics changes, mortality goes down, and fertility also goes down. And this is kind of the main narrative. The forces of modernization are changing societies, and in this way also changing demography. And by watching this movie, and I really recommend, if you are interested, both watch the movie, but also look at the comments on the movie, because there are very interesting discussions made by colleagues from the International Network of Domestic Work. In Spanish is Red de Investigación sobre el Trabajo del Hogar en América Latina. They have discussed a lot the content of this movie, and not just this movie, because there are several movies like this. But we got expired because the main character of this movie is a domestic worker who works in a household in the context of in a Mexican city in the 1970s. And we realized that this narrative of development being the main driver of fertility decline couldn't fit her experience, right? So we could not explain what was happening to the main character of Rome if we were just thinking about the link between development and demographic change. There was something else that was missing and that was really important, which was power relationships. So our intention or our premise when we started this work was to focus on social groups that have not benefited from development, but instead that perhaps have been harmed by this development. Because we know that in parallel to this process of increasing educational attainment, increasing human development, increasing economic growth, we had a tremendous increase in social inequality. And this is, perhaps not surprisingly, absent in demographic research. So we said with Edith, let's try to look for these small groups that probably are not benefiting from development, and let's try to see what demographic patterns can we find and see how can we explain them, right? And for that purposes, because these populations are small in terms of size, we needed large data sets. And this is often a challenge for quantitative research because some surveys, although they're big, they are not big enough to capture small populations, right? So we couldn't use survey data in this case, so we went to look for censuses. And the integrated public use microdata series, international EPUMs, offer the possibility to get access to this census data. So we took census data from Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico, covering the period from the 1970 to 2010. And because these censuses are large, because they interview the entire country population, although we take a sample, that sample is still large, we were able to get information from 32 million women. And this is important because among these 32 million women, only 1.3% of them were living domestic workers, meaning women who work for a household and co-reside with the family that employs them, right? So they will normally have a little room somewhere in the house. Sometimes it's outside, sometimes it's in the patio, like in the backyard. And this 1.3% might seem small in relative terms, but for us, it was sufficiently large so that we can study them from a quantitative perspective because they represent more than 400,000 records in our database. There is another type of domestic workers, which we call here live-out domestic workers, which are women who work for a household in terms of domestic work, but they don't co-reside with the family that they work for. They normally work for several families, and they go back to their house after the day is finished. And they are around 5% of our sample. We know from qualitative literature that these two positions that women can take positions in live-in domestic arrangement and also live-out domestic arrangement throughout their lives. So these are kind of the same population. They just change one position to another depending on their socioeconomic. So these 5% women are almost 2 million in records in our database. So together we have this more than 2 million records of women conducting domestic work for other households. So with this sample, we can study from a quantitative perspective their conditions. So the first thing we did with Edith, and this is because we are demographers, we realized that the small population groups, so a population that represents 1% of total population of 5%, they don't influence aggregated trends. So the figures that I show you regarding fertility and educational attainment, they do not reflect the reality of these groups. So the first thing that we wanted to notice is that these groups are often overlooked and underrepresented in quantitative research. And our goal was to bring them back by studying them. So the first thing we notice is that what you see here is what demographers call a population pyramid. On the y-axis, you have age groups, and on the x-axis, you have the proportion. And the black solid line represents the live-in domestic workers, the group that we are most interested in. And as you can see, this is a very young group of women because most of them, more than 50% of them, concentrate below the age of 20. This is a very young group of women. The same is true for Colombia. Most of them are in the first age group, so 15 to 19 years. And the same applies for Mexico. And we learned from qualitative studies, and this was very important for us because the census data is large, but it's very limited in terms of the variables and information you can extract from them. So we have to rely on qualitative studies. We learned that it's not just that this population of women are younger compared to the general population, but it's also that among them, there is a confluence of disadvantages. So these are not just young, but also women from racialized group, Black women or women from indigenous group are overrepresented among live-in domestic workers, which speaks to the high levels of inequality and social discrimination that happen in Latin America. So that was a very important characteristic, that it was a confluence of disadvantages affecting live-in domestic workers. and the relationship with the employer, because this determines how employers relate to them, because they see them as inferior, because of their racial origin, because of their socioeconomic status, and because of their educational thing. And this is something we can only learn from qualitative studies. And now going to the topic of our research, then with this information from the census, we were able to compute the same indicator that I showed you before, the number of children per woman. And as you for two different time periods, the 1930s and 40s and the 1960s and 70s. And as you can see here in all the three countries, these are very low fertility rates. So below 3 or around 3. And in some cases, in the case of Brazil, which is one of the most unequal countries in our sample, this average is only 1.4 or 1.9 or 1.5. So this is very low fertility. And if we go back to the picture that I showed you in the beginning, showing the fertility decline and how reflecting the kind of developmental process in these countries, you will see that actually live-in domestic workers were having very low fertility compared to the national aggregate. So it tells you something that it suggests that it is not just about development in this case. And we look at if we look at live-out domestic workers, you will see that their fertility is slightly higher. So the children per woman is a little higher, but still below the national levels. So our conclusion when we're looking at these numbers is that it's not all about development. What we're looking at here is about stratified reproduction and unequal power relations, and we extract this from the qualitative research among women from different social classes. So this is our first kind of conclusion. Second, and this is something that I was really happy to hear from Marie-Andrée, is that there are class differences in the fertility consequence of domestic work. And what we are seeing here is the differences in the number of children between employers. So this is women who hire, women in household who hire live-in domestic workers, and non-employers. So this is women without, in households that do not hire live-in domestic workers. And we are computing a difference. So a negative number means fewer children, and a positive difference means more children, right? And we have organized the result by social class. So we have 4 social classes: upper, middle, lower, and lowest. And as you can see here for Brazil, the difference between employers and non-employers is positive, meaning that the presence of live-in domestic workers contributed to larger families among middle and upper classes. And the reverse is true for the lower and the lowest classes. So meaning that it's not the same that the influence of or the potential role of domestic work is not the same across social classes. It contribute to reproduce upper and middle upper classes in the case of Brazil, and we find the same pattern in Colombia, and we find the same pattern in Mexico. So this was really interesting for us because we can see this pattern repeating across different contexts, across all the censuses, because the colors of these dots represent the different census samples that we use. And it was really marked and very important to highlight. We find the opposite pattern for mortality. I didn't include the figure here, but basically live-in domestic workers not only contribute to larger families, but also contributed to a lower mortality of the children of these families. And this was for us an indication that they were given their time to take care of these children, of upper and middle class children, potentially to the expense of taking care of their own children. And this is something that we also find in the qualitative literature, that some domestic workers will spend more time taking care of other kids compared to taking care of their own kids. So this is where the connection between biological and social reproduction happens. And here you can see how, although they are a very small group in terms of population size, 5 or 1%, they can have a very large impact at the societal level because they are helping to reproduce other families and they are helping to reproduce other children. So that was an interesting point to connect reproduction, biological reproduction and social reproduction, and to find this persistent and consistent pattern across all these contexts. So in the end, we concluded that low fertility among live-in domestic workers and also among live-out domestic workers stem from the confluence of disadvantages. So this is because these women are racialized, are socially excluded and discriminated. The everyday mobility constraint that they face because they co-reside with the family that employs them. So there is a lot of restrictions in terms of what they can do, what they cannot do, how can they go out, when they have to return to their house, the people that can invite to their house or not, the physical control exerted over them by their employers. And in this point, the qualitative literature is super rich, explaining how the employers need to control the life in domestic workers' lives. And in general, in more general terms, this is about expropriation of their daily and life course time. So it's like this kind of occupation is extracting their time and kind of expropriating it and preventing them from developing their lives or their reproductive plans. And this happens across the lines of social class because it happens from middle and upper classes to towards lower and lowest social classes. Finally, I think our contribution, more general contribution beyond the context of Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia in this particular topic, I think we notice an urgent need to rethink the theoretical frameworks and the methodological approaches in quantitative studies. We have to rethink how we interpret aggregate results and aggregate correlations in order to better account for social class disparities. I think Edith and I will agree in that we need more social class research from a quantitative perspective because these concepts have apparently disappeared from quantitative analysis. And I think this is useful because it allows us to reflect the persistent and evolving inequalities of our time. And this is a current challenge for us as a sociologist. And I think our work shows that this is relevant and this is important. So finally, I would like to reinstate. Thank you very much to the Sociological Review. Thank you to our 3 anonymous reviewers, to the committee for this year prize, and again reinstate that to our colleagues from RITAL, the International Network on Domestic Work in Latin America. Their work was instrumental for us to understand the very material basis of these patterns that we are observing. They organize conferences, they do a lot of things involving also domestic workers and organizations of domestic workers in Latin America. And for us, that was really, really important in order to understand and interpret our results. So with that, I only have to say again and again, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thanks so much, André. That was absolutely fascinating. I would like, as chair, to take a few minutes to also invite Edith to share some reflections and comments. I know this work has been so collaborative between the two of you. And then if I may ask the audience members, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the hand function and I will come to you. Over to you, Edith.
Thank you very much. I only want to thank again for this year award to the Sociological Review. It's been, I will say it's been an amazing news to close the year. I felt like Christmas came early in that sense. And we, Andrés and I, have been really giving a thought about continuing this, I'll say, this line of research that pays attention to social inequalities using the foundations of sociology itself in terms of theoretical, in terms of the theoretical perspectives, because in our field, which is demography and population studies, we tend to draw on several new theories to kind of keep going with this very generalized overview of the world. And we as also sociologists think, because we both studied sociology too, we also think that we need to stop and step back a little bit, start to thinking differently and paying attention to these group comparisons. We as demographers, I think, tend to overlook differences within countries or within large groups. We tend to put together people and people thinking they are all equal and trying to find one factor that describes them all instead of looking at the differences. So I invite everyone who is now in the sociological quantitative research to, maybe we don't need as many and sophisticated tools to pay a little bit of attention. What's going on with variation? What's going on with difference? That means how really is the world out there. We are really different, everybody, and we need to start thinking about that with our quantitative tools. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you,
pleasure.
Edith, and thank you, Andre. I think your paper sort of demonstrates the best of what critical, theoretically informed quantitative research can be when you're addressing social inequalities. So it's very powerful. Thank you for that. I know webinars are quite difficult space to kind of put your hand up and ask questions, but we have also the chat button, and Danielle is monitoring that as well. But we do have about sort of between 5 and 10 minutes for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please put your hand up, and I will come to you. This is the awkward part, isn't it? Really wait. If I see more hands, I will certainly go to them. But if you don't mind, may I ask a question? I really like to. So the global care chain research, which has looked at transmigration between global South women, for example, who go over to provide social care or domestic work in Western countries. There's a suggestion that it actually has an even more reverberating effect in terms of the care provided by, say, grandmothers. So mothers go abroad to earn the money, but leave their babies and children behind. And literally grandmothers are now performing informal care to raise their children. So there is a sort of intergenerational impoverization, impoverishment of the life course effect that Andre mentioned, when you're talking about expropriation of daily and life course time, which is actually a fascinating finding for aging studies, right? As well, or like life course studies in general. So I found that really fascinating. Did you see any changes to informal care networks as a result of the work that domestic workers were doing?
This is a great idea. We certainly discuss it at some point with the data we have. We cannot look at it, but it will be very interesting to see, because what I suspect is that, and this is something that kind of inspired our paper too, research on international context. It's most common. You can find more papers on this, whereas research on national context is not. And in what you describe, that mothers leave their children behind in an international context also happens at the national level, because most of these of those women that we study in our paper are themselves domestic migrants, because they come typically from rural areas.
Yes.
They come typically from racialized groups. They lived in cities, but they were not born in the cities. They come from small cities or the rural areas surrounding the cities, because those are the places where economic needs are found. So I think what you describe in international chains of care, it's also the case for domestic migration care systems in this national context. So you are just giving us a great idea to continue this research. Thanks.
Entirely, and actually, this is one of the fields of research where migration trends and mobility trends, of course, they are different, actually cohere very well. Over to you, Silka. Thank you so much for the next question.
Thank you. It's a suggestion, because while I was listening to your really wonderful presentation, I was thinking about a study that looked at by Kimberly Morgan, who compared public daycare and private daycare in different countries, and looked at how this reproduces inequality. So my suggestion or question is, to what extent you have thought about looking not only at the private care that is provided by live-in domestic care workers or those who have their own households, but also to what extent in different welfare states there is different quality public daycare, which might perhaps not be so relevant, I don't know, in the Latin American context. But if you wanted to come up with a broader comparison, it might be very interesting to look at those changes. So for example, it would be interesting to see whether you see similar patterns in Europe and in Latin America.
Yeah, Edith, if at some point you want to say something, you can, of course. But I would like to say that this is a really interesting topic, and we did not consider comparing the public sphere, but this is really something we can look at it later, especially in the context of countries that receive immigrants from Latin America, to see whether or not because in Latin America, generally speaking, there is no access to these public systems of care. I mean, to give you an idea, things such as maternity leave or security employment, they don't exist. But when people like me migrated to places, to countries in Europe, like Spain or France, we do get access to these things. So it will be interesting to see if in this context, what would happen. Do we go and use the public service, or people will still keep it in the private sphere? I know there is research on the role of grandmothers also in providing care in European context, but this is something that we could look at later.
It's a topic that just keeps giving, I think, and there's so many rich conversations we can still keep having, and I hope we do. Any other questions that people may have, you can pop it in the chat, or raise your hand. I know it's tricky in webinar kind of environments rather than in face-to-face in sort of settings. Yes?
I actually want to comment something about what Silke just mentioned. They're here in Mexico. I reside in Mexico. Domestic workers mostly will be what we call the informal jobs. So it is very recent, about 5 to 7 years ago, that the law implemented that every patrona should provide care and all the services for the domestic worker. So we're hoping to take a look to the 2020 census, at least in the Mexican case, where now is being a profession that is regulated, to see if there's any change, and what can go on with fertility and mortality for these women. And the other thing that we need to have in mind when we are looking at private versus public, and if preferences are changed, is that there's the presence of a domestic worker. There's not only it is a marker of class. even nowadays. So I'll say, taking again very basic sociology, Bourdieu will say, oh, it's a habitus. So it wouldn't change only because of there's a market out there for everybody, right? So public services will, as in Europe now, happen, right? Public services will be better to be chosen than a person living in your home, but here will be a marker of social class. So that's something that is significant. I dare to say that also in Europe, having a domestic worker living in your home, it is a marker of social class, even nowadays. So for sure, we'll see a change in a general pattern, but there still is this way of working. That's why international chains of care are still reproducing these inequalities. So I dare to say, yes, there will be a little, but not as huge difference as we have found in the last 50 years with the censuses.
No, entirely. Thanks so much for that, Edith. Really appreciate it. I would recommend looking at some of the social mobilities and urban poverty literature in India, particularly, because it seems very similar to what you're saying in Latin America. But it's also around racialized paternalism and like feudalist logics of loyalty and household sort of patronage to these people, which is both demeaning and yet kind of complicated. Huge thanks to our authors. Absolutely smashing paper. Loved reading it. We'll reread it after your presentation, and I do encourage our audience members to do the same. Many, many thanks and many congratulations. Right, so please do put your comments and questions in the chat. But I think moving on, because we do have one more fabulous paper to appreciate, a paper which is quite different from the first winning paper and yet does exactly the same thing. It somehow is theoretically so profoundly enriching and so applicable. That's the thing I love about this paper. Over to Cosmin Popan, who is our presenting author, and the paper has been co-authored by David and Jamie. I think David, they can't be here today at any rate, but many congratulations to all the authors. And over to you. Sorry, I keep doing this. First, before we have you present, I must go to my panelist colleague, Rosie Reed, who will introduce your paper and say very nice things about it. So over to you, Rosie.
Thank you very much, Sweta. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Thank you. So I just wanted to start by saying that it was a real pleasure to read all of the shortlisted papers, which spanned a huge variety of different topics and contexts, as well as theoretical and methodological questions in sociology. And the quality of the scholarship in these papers was really evident and really impressive. So I want to warmly congratulate all of the commended, the authors of all of the commended papers, as well as, of course, the joint winners. I've been asked to introduce Cards Against Gamification. I'm going to give you a flavour of what it's about, as well as the qualities that I think it has that make it a very worthy joint winner. The paper is about the gig economy. It focuses on the experiences of digital platform food delivery workers. As much sociological research has shown, platform work is often low paid, precarious, insecure, and risky for workers. Notwithstanding its successes, labour organising in this field confronts the challenges of mobilising a fragmented and atomised workforce, comprising significant proportions of migrant and sometimes undocumented workers who are often isolated from each other, as well as from trade unions, and whose low pay and experiences of racism and abuse can make them reluctant to engage in labour organisations and disputes. Moreover, as the authors make clear, platform apps engage these workers or encourage these workers to develop entrepreneurial subjectivities as gig workers. which hinge around the notion of being your own boss, of being a flexible and agile player or performer of gigs in competition with other gig workers. So gamification here refers to the incentivization of workers to meet and beat the challenges set, in this case, by the platform app. So the first remarkable thing about this paper lays out this kind of context is the author's innovative idea of devising a game in response to this context, a game which works against gamification, which brings platform workers together into a shared space to share experiences and common understandings and to playfully imagine alternative realities in their working lives. In this game, a group of players select cards at random, which invite them to reflect on hypothetical scenarios encompassing typical hazards, risks, or poor treatment experienced by platform workers. The researchers' insights into these common contentions was developed through detailed ethnographic research conducted among delivery workers in Manchester in the UK over several months. The game also invites players to imagine themselves in other stakeholder roles as restaurant managers, as trade union officials, as platform app developers, or as local or national government, and to consider how these stakeholders could be engaged in improving platform workers' conditions. So the second remarkable thing, I think, about this paper is the author's description of the impact that the game had and the way that it travels. So much of the article describes how this game was first played in online form in 2021 with 5 Manchester-based platform worker participants. And here the authors show very compellingly how during this workshop, the participants shared their experiences, they learned from each other, they built solidarity, pooled their knowledge as platform workers, for example, sharing tips on how to exploit bugs in the platform apps and break the algorithm. In inhabiting the stakeholder roles, they also began to imagine how app development might better respond to their own experiences and challenges, for example, around road safety or navigation, or how the workers might themselves develop an app to organise amongst themselves to put forward representatives and make collective demands. But the article also convincingly shows that the game carries possibilities for experimentation and adaptation to other contexts. So the authors discuss their plans to use the game in research contexts in Romania and France, adapting it to the specific legal, economic and social conditions around platform work and workers that pertain in those locations. And they intend to explore and experiment with what the effects are when you involve a wider range of stakeholders, such as trade unions or the general public. So in sum, this article enhances our understanding of the sociological by providing a really concrete, convincing account of how sociological research can inform the design and adaptation of a game, the playing of which prompts solidarity amongst platform workers, deepens our critical understanding of their experiences, and opens up spaces for imagining how their working lives can be positively and practically transformed for the better. And I think bringing all of these things together in one paper, in one project, is really a rare achievement. So I congratulate all the authors. Well done.
Thanks ever so much, Rosie. Great comments there. If I can now invite Cosmin Popan, the presenting author of Cards Against Gamification, to talk more about this fascinating paper. Over to you, Cosmin.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's thrilling, it's exciting. It's an honor to have received this award and to be invited to talk about the work we have been doing together with Jamie and David. Thank you, Rosie, for the very kind words and very thorough review of our paper. Thank you, Sweta, as well, bringing us all together. So I would like to probably think that this is an open access paper by now, focus probably less on the paper itself, but probably more on how it came to be and what kind of other spin-offs there are as a result of the broader research that has been also informed this paper. I will say a couple of things about the research itself, how it is on the one hand made possible this article, which is indeed an interdisciplinary effort where we have two sociologists working on the gig economy, and then we have a designer in the person of David, and I would also invite him shortly to say a couple of words, obviously. But to an extent, how this is also a continuation of what I have been doing before this, and how also continues to inform my further research that I am currently doing. I will then say a couple of things about the concepts and approaches, particularly insisting on the sociology of the future and utopian sociology, and how we have tried to mobilize these theories and how to actually be able to develop something that's collaborative, creative, and playful at the same time as a method to research these platform food deliveries. And to finish off probably with a discussion of the role-playing card games in the broader set of creative approaches that I have been developing for this broader and bigger project. So this was done during the period of high COVID of 2020-2023. The research itself was a postdoctoral research fellowship at Manchester Metropolitan University. It was a fellowship, Leverhulme Trust fellowship, that enabled me to do this study of platform-based gig economy and its reconfiguration of urban spaces, investigating on the one hand the management of these workers, the algorithmic management of work, but also how instances of solidarity and resistance among food couriers emerge. So this research was largely ethnographic work conducted over 3 years in 3 different cities, in Cluj-Napoca in Romania. Started off actually in Manchester because I was still in Manchester back at the time. Then in Cluj-Napoca in Romania. Romania is where I'm originally from, and the last lap of the research has taken me to Lyon, and it is a multi-sited research because I wanted as well with this project to investigate this embeddedness of digital platforms in different local contexts and take into account how different labor and migration regimes, collective organization and trade union traditions or histories impact upon how this work looks like. So food delivery platforms from this point of view are entangled in different local institutions and practices, and in such a way that it complicates actually the discourses about what is understood often to be a la Polanyi, seamless operations, not of the capital itself, but of the platforms themselves. Their uniformization of spaces and of capitalist extractions that generally sought to characterize what platform functionalities are about. So this is why these 3 different cities with a very different migration tradition, just to compare France and the UK with Romania, 2 ex-colonial empires, and on the other hand, Romania, which at that time, at least a couple of years ago, there were few migrants, but this is also changing, and there's quite a bit of literature reflecting on how this is also changing in Eastern Europe as it does change in Western Europe. So I would then say a couple of things about the work for this paper itself. I had the chance and the honor actually to meet virtually for the first time and to get to work because during the COVID, it was impossible to meet face-to-face with David Perez at Lancaster University, my alma mater, and I knew that colleagues in the Lancaster Institute for Contemporary Arts are doing great work when it comes to interdisciplinary work. And during my time at Lancaster for the PhD, I actually collaborated with many people at Leica. So I took this opportunity to reach out to David and to ask him how he would like to contribute to this. And I found it an enriching experience in what was at that point a very loose idea about how to enable alternative futures in the gig economy. So his experience in collaborative design and creative practices was complemented then by Jamie's more extensive experience, probably than mine for sure, and expertise in the gig economy, but particularly his involvement in collective organization with different trade unions in his research of the gig economy itself. So I took this opportunity to bring together colleagues with different expertise and interdisciplinary in their work to try to address and to figure out how to potentially take forward this question, which I found very salient in my research up to that point, because I was doing about nine months of fieldwork as a courier and following couriers at work in Manchester. And the salient point was how, on the one hand, there's a particular normative future for what the gig economy is, which is all about actually autonomy, individual agency, competitiveness, entrepreneurship, flexibility, and actually how the lived experience of these workers that I have been following for 9 months then was anything but that. And this urge to actually explore what alternative futures would look like informed my initial discussions with David. So to an extent, the theories we have been playing around were about the sociology of the future on the one hand and utopian sociology on the other hand. And it is building to an extent on my previous doctoral work on post-automobility futures and slow cycling utopias, which I have conducted under the supervision of late John Urry, whose work on the sociology of the future was of great inspiration, because he argues actually how futures are non-linear, how they are open, how they are uncertain. And in his last book, actually, What is the Future?, he describes precisely how there is not just one future that oftentimes is outside the realm of societies, which is presented as the future we will eventually be directing towards. In the same way, I was inspired, and we were inspired in our discussion of how to put the whole game together by Ruth Levitas's work on utopianism as a method, where she says about utopia that it should not be understood as a blueprint or a perfect future, but actually as a method to explore contested futures. And we kind of took that invitation, how we can think about better working conditions by exploring what are actually these contested futures, and trying to figure out how we can contest and how we can actually challenge these futures, bright futures of automatization, flexibilization, entrepreneurship, which are prevalent when we talk, and it's increasingly less so, obviously. But 4 years ago, these discourses were still quite prevalent amongst the workers themselves as well. So it was then in the context of this article, exploring their different narratives of the future, than the prevalent ones, which promoted all this idea. And we wanted to use this invitation to think about utopia as a method to explore these contested futures where workers have agency, where they are able to forge connections with one another, where they can show empathy, they can show solidarity, and can create, to an extent, a shared pool of knowledge and eventually be able to organize collectively as well. So this is what kind of made us think about what kind of collaborative, creative, playful methods we could try to put in place. And we thought that trying to engage the workers in such an activity, in such a game, would, to an extent, address this question of atomization at work. And for example, during the fieldwork I've been doing in Manchester, I met quite a lot of workers, and especially migrants, undocumented migrants, women who felt excluded in what they were doing, and they felt actually oftentimes doing very atomized work where they didn't feel like they belonged anywhere. So one such courier, a lady, Pamela, 30 years old, a single mother of Caribbean descent, working part-time for Deliveroo. She was not in any WhatsApp group when I met her that would be used by many couriers actually to exchange information, to give out each other tips, to organize even strikes, as it has been the case previously. I interviewed her in December 2020, and she was, at that point, she only had 2 months in the job. And I just wanted to quote what she told me when I met her. I think that one thing that I'm not quite sure about is when you pick up a job, then by the time you get to the place, you realize that you have more than one delivery. That's a double order. So she received a second order as she was picking up one of these orders. And she said to me, and I was a bit baffled, I don't know if I have the right to reject it or not. And as I was doing this job for slightly longer, I said, well, yes, you can. And there are quite a lot of things that through discussions with her and with others, I realized they didn't know about them, because all this work is a trial and error where you learn by themselves, and you don't have, oftentimes, if you're not in any of these WhatsApp groups, if you're a migrant, you don't speak the language, or if you're a woman and you tend to be excluded in a male-dominated environment, work environment, you don't get to grips with the basics of the job, even after a couple of months at work, which results obviously in lower pay and so on. So this is why we wanted to draw on the one hand on the data I collected, but also to do this in a collaborative way where we gather these workers who otherwise wouldn't have necessarily access to the scarce resources they really have, to share this pool of knowledge that's not there. There's no Deliveroo webpage where you are explained any of this. Then why the creative part, actually? Because during this time doing the research, I also realized, actually, as I was just saying, that this knowledge, this pool of knowledge, was anything but present. So it's not systemized, it's not shared amongst couriers, and most of the people don't have access to it. And I was part of a WhatsApp group that was instrumental a couple of years before, in 2019, to set up the 2 strikes in Manchester. By the time of COVID, where there were more and more couriers onboarded instead of employed, because that's not how they use the newspeak of the platforms. All of a sudden, this WhatsApp group became completely obsolete and irrelevant, to the extent that when they tried to organize a strike in 2020, they couldn't gather the critical mass. And in this context, the need to have this pool of knowledge that I myself somehow managed to gather, and I felt like many of the people, the couriers I was talking with, they were not necessarily aware, especially the newer ones, had to be somehow shared. And that was the idea of actually to build on the stories, build on the fieldwork, to create these conditions for the game where different work situations are being shared and solutions are discussed and roles are being devised. And I take the opportunity now to also show the card games, because we played it obviously during the COVID, and we had to devise an online version of it. And again, David did a brilliant job, but he also did a brilliant job actually at designing a pair of beautiful cards, which are these, with different colors for the different work situations, listening to workers. So we classify them under a couple of themes: listening to workers, health and safety. So listening to workers in relation to the platforms being quite a black box where no responses are given, and bots are most of the time there to reply with completely useless solutions to very clear problems. App transparency, the algorithmic management that's by no means accountable, and you don't know why you might receive or you might not receive an order, and so on. The waiting times, which are part and parcel of what working in the gig economy. So we have 4 types of stories, which are kind of snippets of the data, ethnographic data, interviews I have been collecting, and our frustrations basically put forward in relation to these 4 categories. Then with the red colors, we have questions that couriers ask to one another as they listen to these stories on one of the card. How do they make they feel? How do the stories make them feel? How do they relate to this? To then move on to the last set of cards after discussions and empathy to an extent is being created, and this pool of knowledge becomes something that say, oh, this happened to me as well, and I didn't know what to do. And this kind of a space, a safe space in a way, where they could discuss these things that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. And then we moved on, actually, okay, how do we change this? And we devised this national government, platform CEO, developer, worker association, restaurant staff manager, and local government. And then we distributed these roles again, take another card and see how you would be able to address one problem or the other by taking another role than the one you have, which is the last man standing, the courier that gets to generally bear the burden of all decisions, and bad decisions most of the time. So this was the creative part of it that we wanted to explore through a creative method to engage these couriers. And it was also playful, because work in the gig economy is often framed as a play. It's not serious. You're not employee, you're self-employed. You're going there for a challenge. And actually the apps, Glovo and Deliveroo, they say, join our challenge, go and work more to earn more. Fee boost, earn 1.3 times fees on all orders completed between that time and that time. That's the kind of prompts, notifications that couriers get. So they feel like they are in a game to an extent. And actually, there's one of the couriers telling me, Ahmad, of all names are changed, obviously. So there are these kinds of tricks we do, you know. We play up with the time. We shuffle with the time. We can use less and less energy to make more and more money. So they also buy into this idea of a play. And also cycling itself, it's not a serious transportation. You're not being taken seriously in traffic. Cycling is something, and I did research on this, how the framing of cycling as not being serious and not being a utilitarian transport, but rather sports, leisure, impacts on how the lived reality of working on a bicycle gets to look like. So we kind of wanted to take this idea of play with regards to the gig economy and with the the cycling itself and turn it on its head with a game that does things differently. So that was the idea. So how do findings change the way we see the social? The prevalent understandings of platform labor was something that we wanted to address with this, and how actually this lack of worker agency, this atomization of work at work, this lack of capacity for empathy, solidarity, the capacity to organize, these entrepreneurial discourses and agencies, internalizations of this entrepreneurship that oftentimes is there, actually they can be contested. And that's what we tried to an extent to do with the game, which kept on rolling ever since. We have been using it in classes with students. We have been using it to the different other events I have organized in Cluj and in Lyon ever since. And I also must say that the workforce has changed gradually and quite dramatically, actually, over the years. And there's more and more precarity and vulnerability in the gig economy, and more undocumented workers doing these jobs who are difficult to mobilize to begin with just for an interview. And I think this game should, as I suggested, and we suggested indeed in our papers, to be somehow engaged also with unions that would be able to also put some work, because research can do a bit and we can have a nice and playful time, but it's a bit more difficult to change the working conditions in the gig economy as such. And the last thing, do I have 2 minutes? Okay, I haven't checked the time. So this role-playing game was part of the of a broader set of creative approaches and forms of public engagement of my research. And I will not insist too much because I wanted David say a couple of things. There's been collaborations with visual artists and visual anthropologists that I have also put together during this research, notably Letizia Bonanno, Jose Sherwood Gonzalez, Alin Tamashan, Juana Lohan, Ionuț Dlămița. I will send shortly the link to a website associated with the project where these illustrations of working and migration stories are being beautifully illustrated into stories or just illustrations themselves. I have produced a couple of fanzines that we have distributed for the different exhibitions I have put in place in all these 3 cities, and in general I'll have one in Grenoble. The website, I will be sharing the link, graphic stories, one on Cluj, delivering precarity with Letizia Bonanno, and I will share all these links so you can see for yourselves in the chat. And also the cards, because they can be printed, and that's the idea. They are open source and to be printed and played with and translated and used by other researchers, as I was asked oftentimes to share these cards. And thank you. I would like to pass it now to my colleague David to complement, because certainly he's been the person to do all the nice design and to come with the idea of play to an extent.
That's lovely, Cosmin. Thank you so much. And David, we have about 5 minutes for further comments from David. Fascinating paper, and then we'll go over to questions. Over to you, David.
Yeah, I'm just going to take really short. Well, again, thank you for this. I feel a little bit kind of a sort of guest because I'm not a social scientist, as Cosmin is saying. I'm a design researcher, but something that I'm very motivated in my research is to create social impact. So when Cosmin invited me to be part of this project, actually, we took everything from an interdisciplinary way. There were no kind of such a disciplinary boundaries in here. So we really appreciate the effort that everybody put into this project. Cosmin bringing this kind of amazing kind of and very rich ethnographic data that, well, at that moment, a little bit of the background, he was collecting all his data in Evernote, and I could see how all the updates every single almost minute of very very interesting data were kind of piling up, and we wanted to have a sort of way to bring to break somehow the system of this kind of precariety type of work, precarious work, and this kind of polarization into something that could bring people together. And that was the idea of the game. It was all the time something playful. We were trying to create something that could bring people this working together, to make sense of the data that Cosmin was collecting, to share some of their own experiences, but at the same time to empower them to take some action. That was kind of the final goal of the entire project. Something that was interesting is that we were all the time playing actually against this kind of gamification, and just to give you a little bit of color that obviously we couldn't put into the paper, but even the decision of how we run the workshops. We were in the pandemic, everybody we were isolated. We used the mobile phone, the very same mobile phone that were used as a sort of device for this kind of platform, because we knew that every single participant would have access to those kind of phones that were powerful enough to support this kind of platform that we used to play this kind of online game at that time, that it was a mirror board. So every single thing that we did in that, it was kind of keeping an eye on the reality of the workers and using exactly the same condition actually to challenge that reality back. So that was very, very interesting. And I know that we're running a little bit out of time, and I think Cosmin covered most of the point, but it's been a really great pleasure. And I want to say publicly thank you, Cosmin, actually, to invite me to being part of this project and this kind of collaboration. I do believe that we can learn a lot from different disciplines. It's been a joy, actually, to work in this kind of way. I have done other type of project also, working with social scientists, and I think there is a lot of space actually for this type of research. And thank you again to the committee and the reviewers and everyone in here. And again, congratulations to the other authors for the paper too. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, David. And actually, the interdisciplinarity really shines through in your paper. It really does, from the foundation up, and it's wonderful. I love the play on words. Games against gamification is like a radical reimagining of making a level playing field, isn't it? Because the game that they are forced to play within is not fair, and so really fascinating work. Over to questions now. I know we don't have a great deal of time, but please raise your hand or just put your comments in the chat. I believe that the authors will also be happy to have discussions afterwards. So, by email, so we'll share email as well. Andrés, for a quick question for our authors.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very interesting paper. I don't know if you look at this because maybe it's not part of the research, but I'm very curious to know if you find perhaps difference regarding the national origins of the workers. If you find tensions, because as you said, the migration flows to these countries are different. And I was wondering, for instance, things like language. In which language do they communicate? Was it English? Or in the case of Lyon, they were speaking French. And did you see any tension in terms of trust and solidarity across national boundaries, or do these national boundaries are transformed when it comes to forming groups in these precarious positions? So if you have some information that you can share, that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andres, for the question, and congratulations for your great paper as well. I'm looking forward to read it because I didn't have the time. But now with your presentation gives me the incentive. Well, I didn't insist too much in this presentation about the workforce composition of these food couriers, and as it's often the case with the gig economy, it's racialized and migrant population that does the work. In terms of national origins, then already things get complicated because you hardly have any French doing the job in France, hardly have any British doing the job in Britain, hardly have any Romanians, increasingly less and less of them doing deliveries in Romania. So there's a lot of solidarities and trust being built across ethnic lines, and to an extent, the success of some of the strikes in London, for example, have been crucial to the fact and have been made possible by the fact that there were communities of Brazilian moped riders who had experience of organizing themselves in Brazil, in Brazil, who managed to organize some of the most important strikes in London, for example. This obviously networks of solidarity and trust built across along the racial lines and migration trajectories, if you may, also complicate the possibility to organize collectively, because oftentimes when these workers are migrants, undocumented migrants, they don't necessarily speak the French or the English or the Romanian for the matter. They cannot integrate groups that are run by French-speaking, Romanian-speaking, or English-speaking population. So they tend to fall through the cracks. At the same time, they create these networks of solidarity, which kind of helps them, even with, for example, renting an account when you don't have the papers. You would go towards your community to find somebody who sells you an account or rents you an account in order to be able to continue working. So there are interesting dynamics from this point of view. The good sides where you have a community, you're not by yourself, but also the fact that this prevents people from organizing collectively across a city as big such as Lyon or Manchester or Cluj for the matter.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And there's so many commonalities across the both papers, actually, racialized, marginalized labor force. In some somewhat of a twist of fate, some of my own research actually looks at racialized affect and how gig workers become almost like a member of your family because of lockdown. You can't meet mom who can't make you your dinner, but you do have the gig worker who becomes like a surrogate extended community member or family member, which is really fascinating. I think we are absolutely bang on time, which is wonderful. Huge thanks to everyone who has come to this webinar. Our heartiest congratulations once again to our fantastic winners of the Sociological Journal Article of the year 2023. Absolutely richly deserved. Please do read their papers, which are free to view. And thanks for the cards. I'm definitely going to print them out and use them as well. Outstanding papers. We could not be more pleased. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.